University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson has become a phenomenon. That's not an overstatement. Videos featuring him online get millions of views. His book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, is one of the biggest, maybe the biggest bestseller ever written by a Canadian author. In that book, Peterson questions the left's rhetoric on gender, and maybe for that, he's being targeted for destruction. The Guardian calls him dangerous. Vox just published a massive and almost unbelievably stupid piece accusing Peterson of, quote, reactionary politics that validate white, straight, and cisgender men at the expense of everyone else. Really mouth-breathingly stupid, but there you have it. Jordan Peterson joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on. So obviously a hurt dog barks. You've done something that has made people upset. What do you think you've said that the left finds so provocative and upsetting?
Well, I pointed out quite clearly why they're factually incorrect and ideologically possessed. I mean, particularly on issues like gender. The radical lefties insist that gender is a social construct, and that's just simply not true. So the scientific data on that are absolutely crystal clear, and no reasonable scientist disagrees. And so they're all foaming at the mouth because I'm poking holes in their cherished notions. And they like to think that people are completely malleable because that means people can be made over in their ideological image. So they're not happy about that.
So when they say your ideas are dangerous, what they're really saying is your ideas are dangerous to them.
I hope so. They're supposed to be dangerous to them. I make no bones about that. I'm not a fan of radical leftists. And look at what happened in the 20th century with radical leftist ideology.
What has your job been like back in academia? I mean, you can't be one of many people who has these views where you live and work.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I think they're more common than you think. I mean, my views on gender, for example, and sex, they're shared widely among people in the psychometric personality community. Anybody who studies personality and who's a credible scientist knows full well that the differences between men and women in personality are to be attributed primarily to biological factors. This isn't contentious. The only people it's contentious around are gender ideologues, and they've already lost the scientific battle, and so they've taken it to the legislative front to enforce their views. So they're really not contentious viewpoints. They're mainstream science, and I'm criticized all the time for spouting pseudoscience. It's like, it's not pseudoscience, it's mainstream science. And people who know the literature aren't disputing this. It's been known at least since the 1990s.
Well, then why are people whose views are not rooted in science, but instead in emotion and superstition, dominating our public conversation and punishing anyone who doesn't disagree? How did they get so much power?
Look, I actually think there's a technical reason for that, is that, you know, it's obvious that things can go too far on the right and they can go too far on the left. And it's kind of easy to put a box around people who go too far on the right. You can just look at claims of racial superiority. Right. But it's not so easy to put a box around people who go too far on the left. There's not a single thing you can point to that they do that has the same sort of red flag nature as claims of racial superiority. So it's hard for people who are left-leaning, say, and concerned with inequality and that sort of thing, to dissociate themselves from those who've clearly gone too far. And the problem is we really don't know where the red flags are in leftist territory. Now, for me, it's equality of outcome is a good, you know, so-called equity. That's a red flag, but it doesn't seem as immediately pathological as, say, claims of racial superiority. So it's harder for people on the left to dissociate themselves from the people who would do everyone in, essentially.
So you drew the line at pretending that biological sex isn't real. I mean, that's how you first became famous, because you said, I'm not going to lie about science. Well, do you think it's a good place for the rest of us to start?
Well, I think it's a reasonable place. I mean, the Canadian government built a social constructionist view of gender into the law, and that's just incorrect. I mean, the idea that biological sex, gender expression, gender identity, and sexual preference have no relationship to one another, that they vary independently, that there's almost nothing you could claim that's more false than that. But now it's been written into the law. Well, it's just patently absurd, and it's actually a telling commentary on the state of political discourse across the West, that something like that could even happen. Yeah. But I think it's equality of outcome that's the real pathological desire. That's a bad one.
I agree. But, I mean, I guess the good news is that taking a stand on behalf of obvious truths, there's a huge audience for it, and you're a living testament to that. Thank you, Professor. Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you, too. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Why is that? You kind of paint that as the linchpin of society's survival, right?
Yeah, well, it's the discovery of the future, delayed gratification, right?
Right.
Human beings invented time or discovered time, and we're about the only animals to really have managed it. So we have to sacrifice what's immediately gratifying for the future, and for our future selves, but also for other people.
Right.
But the payoff for that, I think, is not so much happiness, but a sense of deep engagement with your life. Now, one of the things that I've been attempting to make clear repeatedly in my YouTube lectures, for example, is that you need a sense of meaning to fortify you against the trouble of life, the suffering of life, and mostly you find that meaning in adopting responsibility, right? And that's not the same as pursuing happiness, or certainly not the same as being impulsive. You find the meaning by taking care of yourself and taking care of your family and taking care of your community, and if you fail to do those things, there's also a big price to be paid that everyone pays. And this seems to be something that we've forgotten. We've forgotten, and we've also failed to teach to young people, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Which is a mystery and a catastrophe at the same time.
Yeah, you know, and basically you say if you want to change your life, essentially the first thing you should do is clean your room, right?
Well, I'm a traditionalist, partly because of my social science training. Like, one of the things I've learned as an active clinician and a social scientist is that most feel-good, large-scale interventions end badly. Like, it's really hard to take a system that's working reasonably well and make it better, but it's easy to take a system that's working reasonably well and make it worse. And so knowing that, and we know that that's the case, that should encourage you to scale back your ambitions. And if you want to make things better, you could start by taking care of things that are within your control, and also doing it in a way that's least likely to cause harm to other people. And so this clean your room idea has become somewhat of an internet meme, but if you try it and to try to organize those things right around you, you'll find that it's a lot more difficult and demanding than it looks.
Yeah, it reminds me, when I was in college, the people that were the loudest activists, they didn't clean their room. They could change the world, but they couldn't change the toilet roll.
Yeah.
It's true. And they wouldn't even pay for the toilet roll. You know, I love this. There's so many good things in here, and I want to talk about the lobsters, because you do a chapter on lobsters, and it really does tell you about the kind of sobering meaning of life, because what exists in lobsters exists in humans, and you could take the leap from there of how it relates to the rise of Christianity in Jesus Christ. Is that fair to say?
That's a tough leap, that last one.
Yeah, well, lobsters, the suffering of lobsters is based on a dominance hierarchy.
Yes.
And the dominance hierarchy exists among humans.
Well, the point that I was trying to make in that chapter, which is the first one among others, is that, like, the radical leftists have a proclivity to blame hierarchy and inequality on Western culture and capitalism. And look, inequality can be a real problem because people stack up at the bottom, and that can destabilize your entire society. And no one likes poverty. Like, no one's in favor of poverty. But the problem is that the reasons for inequality are much older than human society itself. And so when the radical leftists play their linguistic games, let's say, and blame all of that on capitalism, then they're not treating the problem with its requisite seriousness. Like, we actually don't know what to do about radical inequality. And demolishing the Western system, well, unless you bring everyone down to zero, which is something that's happened before, is not going to address the issue.
Yeah.
And so that was the point that I was making in the
with the
first
lobsters. Yeah, because the lobsters exist way before us, and they have inequality, horrible inequality based on dominance hierarchy. The only reason why I brought up Christianity, and I know we have to go, is because it was a remedy to dealing with the equality. If every individual is seeking truth, that is
your best bet, eh?
Yeah.
Like, your best bet to moving forward through life, despite the fact that it's extraordinarily difficult, is to look clearly at what's in front of you and to tell the truth and to speak the truth. There's an idea, a deep idea that's laid out in the biblical corpus, that the being that you extract from the future, let's say, when you're making your choices, the being that you extract from the future with truth is good. And that's an unbelievably powerful idea. It'd be lovely if that was true. You imagine that the best way to bring the best world into existence is to tell the truth and to live out the truth. I believe that that's the case.
Yeah.
So
there you go. Buy the book. Good book. Great book. Up next, why are there fewer women engineers? Someone should call Amtrak. Thank you. Good job. Men suck. That's according to engineering professors who argue in some journal that masculine social norms prevent women from becoming engineers. They say these harmful norms can include a desire to win, emotional regulation, the exertion of dominance over others, a sense of invincibility, and risk-taking. They conclude that masculinity and their harmful norms justify the subordination of women. Harmful norms? The only harmful norm I know is this dancing bear. That fits into this story, definitely. All right, Dr. Peterson, so if some coworker comes to you for advice over a parent's illness, you have to bill them because that's an emotional thing. And if you're going for a job interview, you should show up in like filthy rags as a way of not to outshine others. That's how you would deal with this advice.
Yeah, well, there's this idea that's promoted by people called social constructionists that all of the differences between men and women are cultural in origin.
Yeah.
And all of the evidence, the credible evidence that's been gathered over the last 3 decades indicates that that's wrong. So one good example of that is that in egalitarian societies like Scandinavia, like the Scandinavian countries, the differences between men and women, the personality differences and differences in interest are bigger, not smaller.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of data points generated by generally left-leaning social scientists.
Yeah, the women, even though there are no gender differences, they still become nurses than men, by far.
And fewer engineers. And that gap grows as the societies become more